I have one more. Okay.
Everyone else born don't have.
Okay. All right. I'm really sorry. If you want to know why I stopped Zoom, this is why I stopped it, but I thought this would be easier, but it actually became worse. So, unless we have someone that's ready to be a technical manager. Okay. All right, let's get started. Last week we discussed some of the basics about God. What is God? Who is God? Where is He? Does He have a gender? And you could say maybe we got through the first page of the questionnaire about what is God. Today we're going to go to page 2. Remember Paul Harvey, now page 2? This is page 2. This is what we're going to discuss today. Number 1, does God have feelings? Does God communicate with human beings? Does God ever act illogically? And why does God have so many names? What's up with the hyphen God, G-D? I'm asked this a lot of times. So, that's what we're going to talk about. The first question is, does God have feelings? Well, page 38, yes. For some of us, this may be an insignificant question. It might be quite significant. When we talk about feelings, so you think you have a relationship, you have feelings, things are abstract, theoretical. If God has no feelings, can I have a relationship with Him? Do I matter to Him? So let's put aside our feelings about whether God ought to be or not to exist objectively. But the question over here is, based on what we learned last week about God's transcendent, simplistic view, so could we really say that God has feelings? If you take a look at text number 1, we'll go to the back. Raymond, read text number 1, page 38.
Okay. God experienced neither anger nor laughter, neither joy nor sadness. God said, I, God, have not changed. Now, where He could be at times enraged and at times elated, He would experience change. Rather, all these emotions are experienced only by those who inhabit bodies that are corporeal and therefore spiritually dark and lowly, who dwell in houses of clay, and whose foundation is the dust of the earth. By contrast, the Blessed One is elevated and exalted beyond all.
So this would seem to say that God has no feelings, right? He's beyond any definition. He can't be any. One second. He can't be. It doesn't fluctuate. Nothing changes. Again, we're going to take questions after each section. So nothing. It seems to be quite simple in this sense, but the truth is nothing is as simple as it ever seems, because there are verses that seem to have a very different perspective on this. As we see in text number 2, Lee, text number 2, page 39, from the prophet Isaiah.
I will speak of God's kindnesses, God's praise, for all that He has bestowed upon us, abundant good for the house of Israel, provided in accordance with His compassionate and great kindness. God said, surely they are my nation, children who will be true to me, and He became their deliverer. In all their distress He was distressed, and the angel of His presence saved them. In His love and mercy He redeemed them. He always carries them for all
So we see over here that there are, and many other passages in the Torah, that God expresses love, kindness, compassion, care, tenderness, maybe some negative feelings, some distress, some sorrow, some anger sometimes. So seemingly you could say the opposite, that God does have feelings. So we have things that seem to suggest that God does and doesn't. So last week when we said we tried to understand God, we have to first back up, and before we try and construct, we have to first deconstruct. We have to deconstruct. That means that often we, in order to answer a question, we have to see that we have to take a step back and see that the answer is like a good Jewish answer, yes and no. Or no and yes.
Not three answers.
And the answer is no, but yes. And of course, this is something that we'll see throughout this course, that this is the fact that this is the fact that there are many different ways to see this, because God ultimately is beyond it. And that is the truth. The truth is that His true, essential, transcendent self is beyond it. That's true. But God chooses to have a connection to the world with us in this way. And this is why, according to Kabbalah, and those of you who have been to my Kabbalah classes, you definitely are familiar with this. According to Kabbalah, God created the world with different feelings, with different attributes. What are they? As we see text number 3. When do you want to read text number 3, page 40?
The world was created with the 7 divine attributes, beginning with chaste kindness, and there are kindness, discipline, compassion, perseverance, humanity, connection, and sovereignty. The role of the divine attributes in creation is alluded to in the verse, I declare, let the world be built with kindness.
So here, this is according to the Kabbalistic teachings. We see that there is God Himself, and then there's something that we'll call godliness. Godliness means the way God communicates with the world, beginning with kindness. The world is created with kindness. Elam chesed yibana. Because what is the idea of kindness? Kindness is the bridge that connects people to each other. Kindness says that I am going out of myself in order to connect to you. Kindness says that you now are meaningful in my life. In other words, I could sit at home all day and just live in my own little bubble and do my own little thing, but the world was created in a way where there needs to be communication. And God Himself says, I am also making that connection, that although God Himself is transcendent and we can't really define it in any way, but God says, I'm going to make a relationship with the human beings to be able to make that connection. So the knowledge that God cares and feels is something that is very empowering for us as well. And we're also taught that just as God is infinite, so too His attributes are infinite, which means that as much as they are a way to connecting with us, they also are a way and a means to connect infinitely. So therefore, if sometimes we may not act so, maybe we may not be so deserving, the kindness will still be there because it's infinite. There's nothing that says that this is the point where it has to stop. There's nothing that says that any one of these attributes at some point is enough. As we see from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, that there's even more. Not only is it that God's emotions are infinite, but even deeper. He says that God, that just like in a relationship that we have, if you want kindness, then you it has to be reciprocal as well. You have to have both sides. Right? It's very difficult. One second. It's very difficult to have just one side. See, someone's trying to get onto YouTube. All right, this is why I prefer to do it in person, because we wasted already 15 minutes because of this. Yeah, it's mine. So, what we see over here, so now we're going to learn something even greater, and that is that not only does God communicate to us with emotions and attributes, but also what we do, we have the ability to connect to God as well, and not only to connect, but what we do could actually affect the way God communicates with the world. And this is really a great idea that's taught by the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, who said that what we do actually affects the way God connects to the world as well. In other words, it's a reciprocal relationship. Read text number 4. Lorraine?
What we do, so does heaven's conduct toward us mirror our own conduct. If we act compassionately, God treats us with compassion. As our sages have taught, whoever shows compassion for those who God has created will receive divine compassion in return. We must therefore conduct ourselves with compassion and goodness and with all others positive traits and rejoice in the lot God has given us. Then God will reciprocate in kind.
So this is really a fantastic idea. Say that God is your shadow, and the way you act, the way we act in this world actually is a reflection, is reflected in above. And what we do and the feelings that we have, that actually affects the way everything that happens in the higher realms. So that's why we have to be careful about what we say. We have to be careful what we do. And we have to be careful the way we feel about things. As there's an old Hasidic saying, "Tracht gut wird sein gut." If you think good, it's going to be good. If we have a positive attitude, if we have a positive approach to everything that happens in our life, then it will actually affect the way things actually turn out in life. If we're careful, the way we think, the way we act, that actually affects the way things happen above. And this is this idea that God is our shadow, that God is shadowing, is mirroring the way things happen on this world. Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Since God would not allow Moses to see his presence by the front, is a rabbi's definition of compassion, kindness, the identical thought processes that we have for compassion, kindness, bitterness, are they the same attributes that God has for those three terms and other terms as well? Are they the same, or is this God's perception and he wants us to feel as his presence what holiness, what compassion really is. Do you follow what I'm saying?
What I'm hearing is two separate questions. One is about God's telling Moses that you can't see me, which is a different subject. What I understand your question is the way we have emotions the same way God does.
Correct.
So the answer is yes and no. In other words, what is the emotion of chesed? What's the emotion of kindness? It could come out in many ways. The idea of kindness just means that you are going out of yourself to do something for another thing, for another person, for another element, for another aspect. It means you are reaching out and giving. Kindness means giving, going out, reaching out. You have gevura, which is translated as strength, but it also means control. It means restraint. It's the opposite, right? That is a very broad definition. It could encompass many different things. When you talk about compassion, which is in Hebrew tiferes, it's translated as compassion, but it essentially means the molding of the two together. Recognizing where giving is too much and where restraining is too much. That's the definition of compassion, right? It's the two. It's the center of the two, right? Chesed means unlimited giving, like Abraham. House was open all day and night, no limit. Anyone come in any time of the day. Compassion says, yes, I want to help you, but we're not open at 2:00 in the morning, right? So you have to know where to draw the line, right? So that's where you have to have this balance between chesed and gevura, between kindness and strength. You understand? So it's very broad how that plays out. Yeah.
Would it be relatively true to say that God's emotions, should he have any, are infinite, where ours are finite?
Right. Yes, that is true. So how exactly does that mean with God? How do you have a compassion which is essentially a controlling the two sides? So I don't we don't exactly know what that means, but it does mean, as we're going to see later, that God's kindness may be even in places that they shouldn't be. Right. For example, yeah.
But all of it kind of falls apart when you consider the Holocaust.
Okay, it's a good question. It's beyond the discussion right now. Okay, let's go on to next question. Does God communicate with human beings? We're actually going to address those type of questions, not somewhat in this class and in the future lessons about God, God anger and that kind of stuff. Okay, so does God communicate with human beings? So they say a couple. Ellen, you're saying on Facebook it asks us to join and we don't need to see you and hear you. Are you not able to see me? If you're not able to see me, let me know. They say that a couple comes to a marriage counselor, and the woman says, "My husband never tells me that he loves me." So the therapist turns to the husband and says, "What do you say?" He says, "Yeah, that's true." He says, "What do you mean? Why would you do that?" He says, "Well, honey, when we got married 30 years ago, I told you that if I love you, and if anything changes, I'll let you know." So, obviously this doesn't work well in a marriage. And we can see you and hear you. Okay, good, thank you. It's common knowledge that the most important element in relationship is communication. If we are in a relationship with God, then we need to communicate with Him. Another way that we communicate is called prayer, right? So that's the way we communicate with him. Let's see. But does God communicate with people? Does God communicate with us? I mean, I meet people all the time that may not be all there, that tell me everything that God told them last night to do. But does God communicate? So you say yes. Okay, let's see, text number 5. This is from Deuteronomy. All right. Al, you want to read text number 5, page 43?
We're finding it.
Okay. Keep up.
43.
Do you want me to read this one and then he'll read the next?
Okay, should we have someone else read this one and then we'll get back to you? Okay, go. We'll go around this one. Okay, read it. You want? Read.
Ask now regarding the early days that were before you, since the day that God created human beings upon the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other end of the heavens. Was there ever an event of this magnitude, or has anything similar to it been heard of? Did ever a people hear God's voice speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and remain alive?
So this is this is Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses telling the Jewish people that you guys heard, right? Some 3,300 years ago, God appeared to an entire nation, millions of men, women, and children. God talked directly to them, addressed them in an event that was unprecedented. We had a course called Judaism Decoded, and in that course we talked about the proof of God's existence and how do we know that the Torah is true. And one of the proofs that we said, and this is perhaps probably the strongest one, you cannot have a claim to say that 3 million people envisioned God, and Moses is telling that to them, that you saw it, and to say that to say that it was something that was made up at some point would be very difficult. In other words, most other religions start by one person saying that they had a vision, but when you have 3 million people having that claim, it's very difficult to refute. But I'm not going to get into that. But just some food for thought on the side. That's not really the point of us bringing this down over here. The point over here is the idea that God communicates, and this is the way God says to the Jewish people, this is my message to you for now and for all humanity and for all future. This is my message. It was and will be the only time. Now, this is on a more public, in a more general public communication. So we have the 10 Commandments to the entire Jewish nation. And then you have another thing, the idea of the Torah itself. Text number 6, page 44.
The eighth principle, the Torah is from heaven. We believe that the Torah that we currently possess is that which was given to us through Moses, and it is entirely from the mouth of the Almighty, meaning that it all came to Moses from the blessed God.
So basically what he's saying, there's 13 principles of faith from Maimonides. And basically what he's saying is that they have the written Torah, but the very fact that the written Torah much of it is written encoded, you would need to accept the fact that there is an oral Torah where God gave the details identifying what things are. For example, we just had the holiday of Sukkot, right? So we take an Esro, right? If you take a look in the written text, the esrog is simply identified as a beautiful fruit. We have a shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah. We just had that holiday. How do we know about the shofar? In the Bible, it simply refers to it as a Yom Teruah, a day of sounding, of blowing, right? Tefillin, tzitzis, everything. If we want to have a proper Jewish tradition and religion, so we have to believe that there, at some point, the explanation to these things were given to us. And that's the idea of the oral law. So we believe that the oral law was given to us. Now you say, okay, that's very nice. That happened 3,000 years ago. And again, we had a whole course on this, explaining exactly how it worked and why this is the right way and why this has to be. This is not the point of this course to prove this in any way, but it's simply, to put it in short, it's simply impossible to have the Judaism that we have today without accepting that there is an oral law that God gave to human beings, explaining to them what to do. Because just with the written law itself, we would not have. Let's finish this section, and then we'll get to questions. Then there is another aspect, which is the idea of God communicating to human beings through prophecy. Meaning, aside from the fact that we say that God appeared to Moses, so that's one thing you could say, or appeared to all the Jewish people, right? You could say, okay, that's something. Okay, so that was 3,000 years ago. So what do you want from me now? So we also have the idea that we believe in the fundamentals of prophecy, that God actually communicates with human beings individually, on a private level. Let's see text number 7. Go ahead, read text 7. Steve, page 44.
One of the foundations of our faith is the awareness that God confers prophecy on you.
This is another one of the 13 tenements of our faith. This is one of the central ideas that, yes, God actually communicates with human beings, not only with all the Jewish people of Mount Sinai, but on an individual level. And this was essentially, a lot of the Torah that we have today is from a section called the Nevi'im, the prophets, and you began studying the prophets. In other words, there was a time that God continued to communicate to human beings, and this was not just a few that we read. We have, only a very small amount of the prophets, but they say that during the time of the first temple, there were over 1 million prophet and prophetesses, and each one received different communications from God. And many of those things that we have till today is the way we do things and accept things based on these prophets. And that's essentially the way they kept their Jewish tradition at the time. Was you had a prophet that would come along and say, God told me so and so this is what we do. Now, if that person is going to come and say anything that is denial or changing the Torah, then you know that that's a false prophet. If that person is, for whatever reason, doing things that seem to be incoherent with the way we know the Jewish tradition should be, then you can know that that's a false prophet. But there are things that were said to prophets at the time. And that's essentially before the Second Temple, and the way a more organized religion, right? People don't like that word, but a more organized Judaism began at the time of the Second Temple. But this was something where you had. Now, we have very few of them today, which is only the ones that are more communal messages that we have till today, which is the prophets that we read from the Torah every Shabbos and the Haftorah, prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. These are all communal messages to specific prophets that we have recorded today. what we see from here is that while we want to believe that God is exalted and greater and higher and unidentifiable, at the same time, this comes to tell us that God comes down and associates and connects with the human beings. And even though you may say, well, God is so great, well, this is one of the issues, actually, one of the things that Judaism specifically wants to differentiate as the way we understand God's authorship of the Torah is the idea of recognizing that God is not too exalted for human beings. On the contrary, God connects with us. God associates with us. And it's to give you an example. Let's say I would have used to say the Queen of England, but now I'll have to switch to the King of England. If the King of England is going to sit in his palace all day and not communicate with anyone, then that's not really a king. What's a king? If that king is going to go walk outside and there's a big parade and there's thousands of people there, then that king is going to go over to a little child and smile to that child and say hello and give that child a little gift, a little something. That doesn't diminish the greatness of the king. On the contrary, that brings out more of the greatness, because that shows that you're not limited to your great fancy castle. It shows that you're not limited to your exalted existence, but rather you're able to communicate even with that little child. And the same thing over here, if you say that God is too exalted, which is what some people want to believe, essentially what you're saying is God is limited. Because you're saying God is limited to the fact that He is too great to associate with the little child. So similarly, the fact that God communicates with humanity, it tells us something very profound. That He transcends transcendence. Transcends transcendence. Right? He's beyond what is transcendent, meaning that that God, He or she, however you want, okay, is not bound to being transcendent, but is beyond that as well. So God is truly unlimited and therefore is able to reveal Himself to a physical person, a physical individual living in this physical world, and to be able to communicate and get that message, how that is. Now, you could say, okay, well, that's great if there's a prophet that's able to get that message, but what if I'm not able to get that? I'm not a prophet. First of all, Maimonides gives a detail if anybody wants to be a prophet. Maimonides has this very detailed, he goes and he says exactly how you can get prophecy. Okay? How do you have to prepare yourself to receive a prophecy? So you could try it out. You could go there and see if it works. If not, there are other ways that people have received prophecies in more modern times. There were different ways that people, for example, the famous story of the golem. It's the story of the golem. The Maharal of Prague, the way he received that prophecy to create the golem was he did something called a shailas chalom. He would ask a question in a dream. He would write a note and put it under his pillow, and then he would receive a message, and the message basically said to create this golem. But what about people like me who don't get these messages? So the answer is, who says God doesn't communicate with you? Right? Why doesn't God communicate with me? And the answer is, He does. Who says that prophecy is that you have to sit down and hear a voice in your head? If you're hearing that's most likely not a prophecy. That's probably more that you need to go and see professional help. If you're going on an LSD trip, let's say we're almost done. If you're going on an LSD trip, then most likely that's not a prophecy. In more subtle ways, communicating, we know that there is ways that we get messages where God speaks to our soul. Where you may be in the middle of your day, your mind may be wandering, you urge to shake off the dust, and suddenly you feel an impulse to do something. You feel it's not right. If you're feeling a message, I just have to do something. I have to make that call. I have to go visit that person that I haven't seen in months. There are different subtle messages that our soul gets. Let's read these two texts before we go to questions. The text A. Michael, you want to read text A?
8:8.
Yeah.
Each day a heavenly voice issues from Mount Horeb and proclaims, "Woe to the creatures who insult the Torah."
So continue on. Our sages.
Our sages state that a daily divine announcement warns against the shaming the Torah. But if this proclamation remains unheard, then what purpose can it possibly serve? We cannot suggest that this announcement is audible to the human ear, because that would contradict our own experience. Who can claim to hear heaven's proclamations? And which fool would believe individuals who claim that they do, instead of labeling them as false prophets? Therefore, if the announcement cannot affect positive change, what is the benefit of its issuance? However, this announcement does not involve actual words. For speech is a physical phenomenon, and there is no physical verbalization, nor are these audible sounds in heaven. Rather, the announcement is issued in the dimension of thought. These thoughts travel to humans on a daily basis and translate into seemingly spontaneous thoughts of repentance that are actually caused by the daily divine proclamation.
So our conscious mind doesn't necessarily hear a voice that's saying what to do, but we do feel a subtle inspiration or a feeling or something that's coming to us as a result of God's communicating within our inner selves. And this is giving us comprehensive messages that's saying, pick up, go, and do something. There was a woman that once wrote to the Rebbe and said, how come I want to have personal guidance. Tell me exactly what to do. And he said, God speaks directly to your soul, and these communications are behind your good resolutions. So while they may not be in forms of prophecy necessarily, booming voice or fiery cloud, but God very much communicates with us. And you say, well, why? Let God just tell me exactly what to do and I'll do it. Because then you're going to have the lack of free choice. God wants to put you in a position that you have to make the choice to do the right thing, but at the same time it gives you the inspiration to help you to be able to do what you're supposed to do. You had a question?
Yes. I always thought as prophecy is foretelling the future or some event that's coming. What does it mean in Jewish thought?
So it is. For some, that is. And that's why for those prophets that are relevant specifically to telling the future, some of those are recorded. Like the prophets of Isaiah and Jeremiah and different ones that are for the public. But what we're saying is that the idea of prophecy is God communicating with individuals for yourself, for your own life, for your own guidance. In other words, it's not only about foretelling the future. Is the idea of prophecy today with telling the future for certain individuals that are leaders of Klal Yisrael? There are leaders of the Jewish people. Yes, there are. There is the idea of prophecy for the future. I mean, we know, and I could talk about this all day. Things about that the Rebbe said about certain things that he said either publicly or privately, and nobody expected that to be the case, and yet those things actually happen. So you do have the idea of certain individuals that have to give over messages for the world at large, or for the Jewish people at large, or for a certain sect of individuals. But we're talking on a more individual way. Each of us do have that sense of inspiration that we get, and that is a form of prophecy. Any other questions?
Quickly, if God tells you to do something, is that prophecy?
He told us to do 613 mitzvahs. But you could say that God maybe puts you in a position to do things. Here's a personal thing I have. I'll show you this picture. Is it up on the screen or it's not? Yeah. That's a guy that I met on an airplane. Okay? As you see, it was still during COVID, so I had my mask on. He had his mask on. Where I was forced to do something because of the specific time constraints. I had to do something that I typically don't like to do, and that is I had to daven on the airplane, do the morning prayers on the airplane. Because of the specific time constraints, based on when we took off and landed, it just wouldn't have worked out otherwise. And so here I was. I was sitting in a seat that I didn't like. I was put in a seat that I didn't like. And because I usually like to sit in the aisle, and I was put, I think in the window, and it's a little frustrating. And more than anything, here I was in the middle of the flight. I had to take out my talis and tefillin, and I was towards the front of the plane, put on my talis and tefillin, and I had to go daven. And in my mind, what was I thinking? I was thinking the guy next to me must think that I'm nuts, right? But I knew that there has to be a reason for this. So as I was wrapping up my tefillin and putting everything away, I said to the guy next to me, "Are you Jewish?" And he said, "Yes." And I said to him, you see, I just did the prayer. Would you like to do the prayer as well? And I was shocked when he said yes, because I was sure that he was thinking, this guy is nuts. But he says, "No, actually, thank you very much for asking me. I haven't done this since my bar mitzvah, and I'm really happy to be able to do this again." He says, "I grew up in a very religious home, and I haven't been there for a very, very long time, and I can't believe that I met you here today, and I'm so happy that I was able to do this with you." So here it was on the plane, where obviously I was put there, and this is of course one story of many. Of course, all stories happen on airplanes. That's how it goes. But we all have these stories, but we have to be the one to make the move. We're put in the place. I could have just gone a whole flight, not said anything, not asked anything, and life would have moved on, and his life would have moved on. But we're each put in these places, and that's exactly what this video that I'm about to show is about, recognizing that where we end up in life is not simply by chance, but everything that happens within our life is with a designed purpose.
Danny was turning 13 in the winter of 1955. Like his classmates, Danny was gearing up for his bar mitzvah. But we also prepared something quite different. A private audience with a world-famous Jewish sage, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The goal was simply to receive the great rabbi's blessing. But Danny was nervous. He was far more fluent in sports than Jewish studies. And having to face a genuine Hasidic master sounded intimidating. What if the rabbi would ask him about his Torah studies, or test his familiarity with the fine points of Jewish practice? But he didn't have to worry. When the Rebbe turned to Danny, he didn't ask a thing about his studies. In fact, his question was one that Danny never dreamt of hearing from a Torah sage. The Rebbe asked, "Are you a baseball fan?" Danny nodded enthusiastically, so the Rebbe took it further. "Are you a fan of the Yankees or the Dodgers?" Danny was most surprised, but hey, these were questions he could easily answer. He was a proud Dodgers fan, but the Rebbe was not done. "How was the last game you attended?" "Disappointing," Danny confessed. "By the 6th inning, the Dodgers were losing 9-2, so we left." The Rebbe nodded. "Tell me, did the players also leave the game when you did?" "Of course not, Rabbi," Danny exclaimed. "Players can't leave in the middle of a game." "Why not?" smiled the Rebbe. "How does that work?" "Well, Rabbi, there are fans, like me and my dad. We just watch the game. And there are the players who actually play the game. We can leave whenever we want, but players have to continue trying to win the game until it is over. The Rebbe was waiting for this moment. That's the lesson you should take for your life as a responsible Jew, he gently advised. You can either be a fan or a player. Be a player. Well, Danny left that meeting with a new sense of purpose. He no longer viewed his bar mitzvah as a routine nod to an ancient tradition. No, it would be the starting pitch in a lifelong game he would play to win.
Now I'm going to tell you something that when JLI put this together, they did not know. And that is, you know who this story happened with. It was Chani's grandfather. Now, I don't know if the details are exactly the way it's in this video, but this idea of the story with the baseball players and the fans and the Dodgers, this story happened with her grandfather. So anyway, so what do we see from here? What we see from here is that we are all players, and we all are part of this Jewish mission, and this whatever our position in life is, whatever our position is to play, we all have to play that. And you know, there's different facets to every game, but everyone is a part of what makes this game called life what it is. And God communicates that to each one. You know, the ball is coming our way. That's a message that we got to do something. Are you going to let it fly by you? You may, but that could affect the whole game, right? Are you going to let that ball just go by? The whole game could be affected by that one choice that you do. Okay, next question. So, why does God communicate in such an indirect manner? Because God wants us to choose whether we put an effort to listen to His messages. So the answer to this question, does God communicate with human beings? The answer is three answers. Number one, yes, God communicates through the Torah. And that was the answer to the question of how do you know what to do? The answer is that God tells us in the Torah specifically what to do. God communicates through the prophets. That's also about what to do, or telling us about the future, about knowing what's going to happen. And then for us, we have it in a subliminally way. These prophecies as well. Next, number 3. Does God ever act illogically? I know a lot of people are going to say the world doesn't make any sense. It's a crazy world. Things are happening that don't seem to be going right. There's no shortage of inexplicable events that are happening, seeming senseless tragedies. Yes, we sometimes see the silver lining, but not always are we going to see that. And sometimes we really don't understand what's happening. This is not necessarily the question of why God does bad things. We're going to talk about that in upcoming lessons. But this is a general question of, is there a reason for everything? Do you have to say that we live in this sophisticated system that yes, humans don't understand, but everything ultimately has a plan? God knows exactly what He's doing. Everything is there, difficult to comprehend, but yes, there is a logic behind it, and God just sees the larger picture. As we see in the following text number 9, page 48, we'll jump back to Larry. I'm going to read text 9, page 48.
Rear view.
Yeah.
Certainly the testimony of the Torah regarding creation, that it is very good, from Genesis 1:31, is true. However, this is only stated from the unbounded perspective of the Creator. In man's finite, limited view, the absolute good in creation is not apparent. The contrast is striking and undeniable. To what might this situation be compared? To a person who views a beautiful tapestry, the work of a fine artisan, which contains, woven into it on its front, a representation dazzling to the eye. To our great sorrow, we see this image, i.e. the world, from the obverse side. Can such a sight become a sublime aesthetic experience? Thus we are incapable of comprehending the panorama of reality without which one cannot uncover God's master plan, the essence of the works of the Holy One.
This is from Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, the founder of anyone know, is founder of Yeshiva University. And he's basically saying that yes, everything has a reason, everything has a plan. We just don't understand it. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's like looking from the other side of the tapestry and you're not really seeing the full picture. But this is not the whole picture. No pun intended. There is more to say, because while we can definitely accept that there has to be a plan and everything is part of God's master plan, we also have the yes and no, or the no and yes, which is that while we might feel good to assume that everything is logical, but it's also illogical to assume that God is purely logical. Let's say that again. It is illogical to assume that God is logical. Why? Because again, we're running into the same question. You're again saying that God is bound to this box, to say that everything has to have its time and place. Otherwise, there's something wrong. So yes, God generally sticks to the rules of logic, but He's also free to be illogical as He pleases. Now, don't mix up being illogical versus unreasonable. When we say that you are illogical, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being reasonable. It just means that you're doing things that not necessarily is all within the confines of a perfect explanation of why you could say why you're doing this. And one great example of this is when it comes to the idea of teshuvah, repentance. The idea of repentance basically is God saying that even though you messed up, still, that's okay. And we talked about this in this next quote we brought down in my previous course called Beyond Yom Kippur. We brought down this quote. We'll read this, text number 10. We'll read text 10, page 49.
Wisdom was asked, what should be the consequence for one who has sinned? Wisdom responded, evil pursues sins. Prophecy was asked, what should be the consequence for one who has sinned? Prophecy responded, one who sins shall die. Oops. The Torah was asked, what should be the consequence for one who has sinned? The Torah responded, let them bring a guilt offering and they will be forgiven. God was asked, what should be the consequence for one who has sinned? God responded, let them do teshuvah, repent, and they will be forgiven. This is the meaning of the verse, Psalms 25:8. God is good and just, and He therefore directs the sinners on the way, meaning that He shows sinners the path of teshuvah.
So we have a few different perspectives here. The first one is that of wisdom. In wisdom, which is basically logic, it says everything has to make sense. Everything has a cause and effect. So just like if someone eats poison, there's a consequence. Stick your finger in fire, there's a consequence. Everything has a consequence. So you sin, there's consequences that go with that. You will have to suffer whatever goes along with that. That's what wisdom says. Then you have prophecy. Prophecy, in a certain way, is even worse than wisdom, because wisdom is saying that a sin leads to negative results. But prophecy says one who sins shall die. Why? Because from this vantage point, what are you doing? You're the epitome of doing something selfish against God. And prophecy says, God is communicating with me, telling me everything that needs to happen. God is the ultimate of everything. That's what prophecy is. Prophecy says, I have to do exactly as God tells me. And you're going against that. So you're not worthy of living then. Because you're not being who you got to do. That's prophecy. Then you have the Torah. The Torah says, let's bring a guilt offering and be forgiven. The Torah says that there is an atonement, but it's sort of like an undo button, meaning that the Torah says that there's ways to fix what you messed up. So if you stole something, then you return it. If something breaks, you can't fix it, you have to replace it with a new one. So you are somewhat fixing that up, but only on a very superficial level. You're not actually changing the past. You're just trying to make it better for the future. And therefore Torah says, you sinned, you did something against God, let's try and make amends. Right? And therefore you're going to give this gift, you're going to bring the sacrifice. But God is saying something altogether. God is saying Teshuvah exists in this plane where a relationship between God and us are not mediated by any sort of logic. It's not that anything has to be in a certain way. Teshuvah can completely undo anything simply because God says this is the way I want to do. It's not only saying, I'm sorry, let's try and make amends. Teshuvah has the power to completely change everything. A sin can turn into a merit by teshuvah. What you did wrong can actually become something good. And you have the breakdown as well in Consequences of Sin. You could read it again. But the idea over here is, what God is doing is He's saying that I'm loving you unconditionally. There isn't really a reason why you're going against me. You're doing everything that you shouldn't be doing. I told you don't eat cheeseburgers, and I told you fast on Yom Kippur. You're eating cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur, but still, I love you. Why? Why? Because this is what it is. You could have something that doesn't make sense. It's like it's like the difference between a business relationship versus a relationship of a parent and a child. A business relationship, if you're messing up, you're not bringing in money, you're not doing what you got to do, it's not working out. You got to be fired. That's it. But when it comes to a parent and a child, that child could mess up again and again and again, and still the parent loves them. And that parent is going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to send you to therapy to try and help you out, and again, you're back in the streets again doing the same thing. And yes, we see this many times with children, and some, unfortunately, who end up here for whatever reason. But this is an illogical love, and this is what I'm saying. This is what we were saying before. That there's a difference between saying illogical or unreasonable. Illogical means there isn't really a way for me to explain it, but there's just this deep connection. And so that's why we don't want to say that God does things that everything makes sense, everything has to come about. No, not necessarily. God says some things may not have a reason. There may not be a reason why I am going to pick you. There may not be a reason why I love you. That's one of the reasons we were talking in our Yom Kippur lesson. We said that Yom Kippur, there's a lottery. There's 2 times a year where there's a lottery. Yom Kippur and Purim. There's 2 days of a lottery. What's the idea of a lottery? The idea of a lottery is that it's beyond logic. I know you all want to win the $1.6 billion. 1.9, okay. 1.9. But it's beyond logic. It's you could pick all the numbers you want, but that's not going to make you win. It's either going to be your numbers or not. So there's a very powerful lesson for us as well, that logic is a useful tool, and we certainly have to try and do things in life that make sense, or we certainly have to try and have a life that everything works together. But at the same time, we have to know that ultimately there are things that may not be so logical. We see this as an interesting discussion with Moses and God after the sin of the golden calf. Text number 11a, page 52. You want to read it?
Stiff-necked people, Moses pleaded, God, if I have found favor in your eyes, may you go in our midst, for they are a stiff-necked people. So pardon our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance.
Does this really make sense? That, well, they're stiff-necked people, so therefore you should forgive them. Okay? I mean, stiff-necked people doesn't sound like such a great thing. So saying, God, come on, they're stiff-necked people, please, just forgive them. All right, I don't need your stiff neck. And I wasn't speaking to you. I was speaking to the idea. God is saying, I don't need your stiff neck. That wasn't actually directed to you at all. God is saying, I don't need your stiff neck. Do the right thing. But God says, okay, you know what? You're a stiff-necked people. I'm actually going to like you. What? So, what does this mean? You want to read text number 11b?
Sure. Holy obstinacy. The will of those who fear him, Psalm 145:19. This is the will that transcends God's God-given wisdom. The pristine will and spirit of dedication of those whose hearts are inspired to engage in a wholesome service to bring gratification to their Creator. Regarding this will, it is stated, for they are stiff-necked people, and you will pardon. For pardon similarly transcends wisdom. As illustrated by our sages' teaching, they asked wisdom, etc. Moses requested that God respond to their transcendent dedication with transcendent pardon.
So what's essentially Moses' argument? What's he saying? He's saying, yes, the Jews messed up royally, but don't give up on them so quickly. Because you don't know what they are. These are people that are going to stand by you no matter what. They'll be with you unconditionally. They'll be with you in a way that transcends all logic. They're going to stay a Jew even though no matter what happens to them. They're going to stay a Jew during the Inquisition. They're going to stay a Jew during the Holocaust. They're going to stay a Jew during all the most difficult times in history. They'll still stay with you. And you'll say, why? Why do you want to be this? Why do you want to do this? And it will be very difficult to understand. So yes, we are a stiff-necked people. Despite the exile, the persecutions, the expulsions, we refuse to abandon our connection to God, even when logical considerations might tell us otherwise. We're devoted to God unconditionally. We have this irrational attachment that for the same reason that God has to us, we reciprocate as well. And we want to connect with Him as well. So viewing our connection with God is a deep and personal bond that transcends the explanation and that demands a shift to our entire approach to Judaism. That some things we do because this is the way we gotta do it because it makes sense, but then there are things that affect our very identity and our commitment that isn't limited to what's logical. And it's not saying that it's a rational behavior that's harmful, that's dangerous, it's stupid, it's irrational, but it's actually in the highest value to say that no matter what, we're going to stick with you and we're going to be there. Here's another personal incident I'd like to share. This is a man, his name is George.
What is it? A man what?
His name is George. He has since passed, but when I went to see him, he was in his last days. And he was a over 100-year-old World War II veteran. There's a time when I went to see him, and he was talking about his experiences where he went to liberate the camps. So he was an American Jew that went to fight and to go liberate the camps. And when I went to see him, it was the first and only time that I met him. He was telling me about some of his experiences, and he said the one thing that I never understood, he said, I would go and pray with them. I would go and celebrate with them. They had holidays. They did Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together after they were liberated. And he said, one thing I never understood. I never understood, why are they always so happy? You know, you're going through the suffering, and yet they always seem to be happy. And he said, you know, they were always singing joyous songs on the holidays, and there was always a feel of celebration, even though there was so much suffering going on. And he said that they told me, as long as we're alive, we'll be in good spirits and we'll celebrate. And so this is one of the things that he shared with me. So this is the idea that we're bringing out here. That not always could you explain everything that's happening. Some things are illogical, but ultimately, this is what we are. We're a stiff-necked people, and we'll always stick through it. Okay, any questions before we go to the next? Yes.
It's like, I'm sorry, go ahead. Being happy, it's amazing how what is happening in Israel with all the terror, wars, and Israel has always come out as one of the happiest countries in the world.
Yeah, okay, very good. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk illogical. When we talk about the big picture, the bigger the picture, the more blurry it gets. The smaller the picture, the
Depends how you're looking at it.
more clarity and more vividness that you can see what's going on in the smaller picture.
Okay, so
We can't talk about the big picture. It becomes blurry to us.
okay, so what's your point?
So
what's your point?
Where am I not understanding?
I don't understand what your question is. So we don't get the big picture.
We can't look at the big picture.
Okay, so
The big picture more blurry, we see it. We
fine.
see.
So who's saying to look at the big picture? I never said that you have to look at the big picture. I don't remember saying that.
Before I said, let's look at the big picture. Bigger than what we see as an individual.
I'm not sure why you took that as a point of anything that I said. I said that the idea of being illogical is sometimes a good thing. That's what we were bringing out. It had nothing to do with seeing.
But if you look at a small segment, it is very clear to understand.
Okay, so I don't understand what the point is. Okay, let's move on. Next question. We're gonna have to move a little bit. We're running late. I know it's partially my fault. I apologize, but let's try and move on. Why does God have so many names? Page 55. In your estimation, are God's names more verb-like, noun-like, adjective-like? Can you explain your selection? I'm not going to have you explain it now, but just think about it. Imagine you're hosting a special event, and you see a new face, and you want to know who it is. You know, they say that a gabbai once comes into the shul and goes over to an individual sitting there in shul and says, I want to call you up to the Torah. Can you tell me your name? He says, my name is Esther ben Moshe. He says, I think you're giving me the wrong name. Do you mean to say something else? No, Esther ben Moshe. He says, since I've been having financial problems, everything's in my wife's name. So, if you go to someone and you say, what is your name? And he says, well, it depends. When I'm courteous, people call me Steve. When I'm in a bad mood, people call me Ben. When the weather is rotten, I go by Irving. When I'm playing golf, I go by Harry. Right? What exactly is this? But we actually see a conversation like this. I'm going to read the next text just in the interest of time. God, Elohim said to Moses and told him, I am Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, okay, Ani Hashem. The reason that we say that is because we refer to it simply as Havaya because we don't want to pronounce the name. This is the holy tetragrammaton name of God. Am I pronouncing that? Huh? Tetragrammaton name of God. So we don't actually pronounce it. That's why it's spelled like that. And then what did he say? He says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Kel Shakai, which is another name of God, and I did not make myself known to them by the name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. Okay. If you're confused, you're entitled, because we see that God is basically saying that there are a number of ways to connect to Him. The name Elohim, Kel Shakai, Havaya, these are different names to connect to God. They say a man was invited to a dinner with his neighbors, and a gentleman said that it's so beautiful that whenever I see you're sitting next to your wife and you always speak to her in such a dear way. You say, honey, darling, sweetheart, pumpkin. So it's always so nice how you always refer to her. And he says, yes, about 10 years ago I forgot her name. So you know, we see that God has a lot of names. Now we're going to refer to something that we talked to last week, and there was a discussion about that. About the name Eyash, I will be which I will be. And I looked into the question that you asked, and the answer is actually in Rashi, found as it's brought down here. We're not going to read this whole thing. This figure 2.2. You could read this on your own. We don't have time for all this. But it actually means both. The answer is it means both. Aya means I'll be, and I am, and it also means I will be. And as Rashi explains, says, I am with them now, and I will be with them in future exiles that they have. But God responded to Moses, and he said, Aya, I'll be what I will be, or I am what I will be, depending how you translate it. Rabbi Abba ben Mamo explains, God told Moses, you are seeking to identify my name. My name reflects my actions, and I am therefore known at times as Kel Shakai, Zevot, Elikim. When I judge my creators, I'm called Elikim. When I wage war against evildoers, I'm called Zevot. When I suspend the retribution individuals deserve their sins, I'm called Kel Shakai. And when I act compassionately with my world, I'm called Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. I know that this is very difficult. This is very Kabbalistic. So he's saying, I will be what I will be. So another way, we're actually giving another translation to the verse that we said last week. And what God is saying, I will be what I will be, is that depending on who I am at that time, that is how I am going to be identified. And over here you see figure 2.2. Again, this is we can't read through all this, but this goes through a number of the names of God and what each one represents. And many of these are ones that you probably have heard before. Elohim, Shakai, Ribono Shalom, Akadosh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchei Amlachim, sometimes just Hashem, sometimes the Oibishter, and you'll read through it in your own time exactly what they are. But,
Once I heard something that I think might be relevant here. A beloved child has many names, and God has many names because we love Him and He loves us.
Okay, very good. I'm going to give another explanation. I'm not saying that that's wrong. That's also correct. But I'm going to give a little bit of a different explanation here. And that is based on what we've talked about until now. And that is that the reason why God has so many names is because precisely what we've been talking about till now, that God is nameless. And if a person doesn't have a name, you can't really identify that individual. So basically you're forced to say, based on what they are doing at that time. You know, hey jogger, hey baker, hey chazan, gabbai. You don't know what they're doing, and so therefore you identify by what their actions at that particular time is. And so God's essence, in the way, is for himself as well, well beyond any description that any name could give, because a name is a description of an individual. So therefore, we connect to God by what God's definition is at that moment. And that's what you see with all these names here. Each one defines God in a different way according to what God represents at that time. Another thought to bring in here is the idea of a blessing. We say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. And we're used to saying this, for whatever it is. Hamotzi lacha min haaretz. The Hadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh, right? We say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. What does that actually mean? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. What does that actually mean, right? Well, blessed are you, God. Okay, right, blessed are you, God. Well, let's break this down for a moment. See in text 2.3, what does it mean, blessed? Baruch, right, means blessed, means, it comes from the word mavrich, which means to draw down. Baruch means to draw down God's energy into this world. And then you say ata. What does it mean, ata? Ata means you. What does you mean? You means that I don't actually have a identification for you. I am just turning to you and saying you, the very being, the very essence of you. That is you. When we say you, that is the most essential way to connect to an individual, is saying you. So you say, I love you. You're not going to turn to your spouse and say, I love it. No, I love, well, I love it, or even by their name, I love Sarah so much. No, you turn to her and you say, I love you. Then we say, this is the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is Havaya, which is returned to Havaya. That's the God's name, as we say, God's primary name. It connotes his role as transcendent and timeless creator of all. Elokeinu means our Elokim, means our God, means the way God associates and relates to us. That's Elokeinu. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu. And then he is Melech HaOlam. This refers to God's stage in which he takes a monarchical, did I pronounce that correctly? Whatever. The way God associates it with the world. Let's just put it that way, right? So blessed, we seek to draw down. In short, God, blessed are you, God's essence, the transcendent creator who invests himself into nature, into our world and individual life. So what are we doing when we're saying a blessing? Essentially, what we're actually doing is we're saying God is much greater than this world. God is beyond this world, but by us making a blessing for a mitzvah, or even for something that we eat. We're eating a bagel, and we're saying, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz. What are we saying? We're saying that I'm not simply eating a bagel. I'm drawing down God's blessing into this world by eating this bagel. Hopefully, it's a kosher bagel, and because otherwise we shouldn't be making a blessing on it. And I'm drawing that down into this world with this that I'm eating, or with the mitzvah that I'm doing, the Shabbat candles that I'm lighting, or the kiddush that I'm making, Borei Pri Hagafen, or whatever it is. What are we doing? We're drawing God's presence into this world. That's what's happening at that moment. So why is God have so many names? Number one, God is nameless. And number two, how many names? His names refer to his interactions with creation. And now we're going to quickly do the final one. I know we're a little bit late. Let's quickly do the final one. Why do we have a hyphen in God's name? This is a very common question. Why when we write God, they say G-D? So it's interesting that in the story of Hanukkah, the Syrian Greek persecution of the Jews in the 2nd century BCE, is a story that ultimately came to Hanukkah. One of the things that the Greeks banned was they said, they don't want anyone to mention God's name. No, because they said Jews are saying too much, thank God, bless God. They're blessing God, they're thanking God too much. Don't say God's name. You see, the Talmud says the Syrian Greeks decree that Jews were prohibited from uttering verbal references to God. Conversely, when the Hosminian government grew powerful and triumphant over the Syrian Greeks, they instituted the practice of mentioning God's name even in the ordinary legal documentation, and thereby became customary to write Yir Sas and Shas of Yochanan, the high priest of the sublime God. So they would write God's name everywhere. They said, we're not going to listen to these Greeks, we're We're going to put that, every single document is going to say God's name. And the sages had an issue with this, because they said that what's going to happen? You're going to put some document, eventually the document's going to be ripped up, thrown in the garbage, and you're throwing out God's name. And that's disrespectful. So, text 15b, when the sages heard about this practice, they protested. Once the debt is paid and the document's usefulness is expired, will be thrown into the trash heap. The sages annulled the Hasmonean ordinance and celebrated establishing the date as a minor festival. So, what were they essentially saying is that God, each name represents God in a different way, and you're basically disrespecting it. It's going to be disrespected. Now, till today, we do have the custom to have reference to God, even in documents. If you notice, almost everything that we publish, pretty much, even online, always has on the top either a little BH or a base hey. If you notice that, almost everything that we publish, that stands for Baruch Hashem, bless God. But we're not actually writing it out in case that document does get thrown out. But we do want to reference God in every single document that we put out. But nevertheless, you don't actually write God's name because you don't want it to be disgraced. It's almost like, if there's a flag of the country, the United States, someone goes and burns the flag or throws it in the garbage, then that's disrespectful. It's not that you're disrespecting that little piece of cloth. You're disrespecting the country by doing that, right? So a lot of times I do funerals by the Florida National Cemetery, and then there's a whole spiel they do where they get together and they fold the flag, and it's a very moving ceremony that they do with the folding of the flag. So why? Because the flag is not just a piece of material, but it represents something. In the same way, God's name is not just God's name, but it represents God Himself when you write God's name. That's why we don't erase God's name. Text 16, from the Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch, is forbidden to erase even a single letter from any of the 7 divine names that may not be erased. So this is saying that there's a prohibition against erasing God's name, and this is generally about the way we talk about God. We have to treat it very carefully for what it represents, and it's also halachically, according to Jewish law, it's forbidden to disrespect or disregard God's name. And therefore, when we put the hyphen, this tiny mark, it demonstrates our respect and love for the Creator. And if for whatever reason that's going to be thrown out, we don't want that you're going to fully write out God's name, because if you fully write it, and there's a reasonable probably chance that it's going to end up in the trash, we want to properly respect God's name. And so next time you do see God's name, just take that opportunity to remind yourself that that small dash reminds us that the Creator, while He's infinite and we are finite, still everything that we do matters, and we have to be true to ourselves to be loyal to our mission and our purpose. And the function of that hyphen that's within God's name is to connect those two separate worlds that we have. That's what his hyphen is, connecting. So we have to have the right attitude to the proper respect, and then you could have the human and divine coming together in a loving way and in a reverence-based way to bring the two worlds into one. And so, therefore, we should never erase God's name. And number 2, the tiny mark demonstrating our respect for our Creator, and it also is the idea of connecting the human and divine in a loving relationship. So, what's up with the hyphen? We avoid writing God's name in material that may later be defaced or disregarded, and it shows our reverence for God. That will conclude today. Key points.
Well, I have a question though. For instance,
Hold on.
Lesson 2. His nature. 1. God is, by definition, beyond feelings. Nevertheless, God chose to create the world and to relate to it and to us with emotions and feelings. Therefore, many Torah passages describe God expressing a variety of feelings towards us. 2. God gave us the power of generating His own feelings through choosing to reflect our feelings back to us. Therefore, when we act kindly, God acts with kindness towards us, etc. 3. God communicates with humanity in several formats. First and foremost, God communicated through the Torah, both the written and oral laws. God also communicates via prophecy. He further communicates with us individually via subliminal communications that cause us to experience unexpected inspiration. 4. God generally chooses to stick to the rules of logic that He created, while reserving the option to act irrationally at times. An example of irrationality is the concept of divine atonement, through which God illogically pardons those who perform teshuvah. God's love for us is super rational, and we reciprocate in kind by being stiff-necked, illogically, and stubbornly devoted to God. 5. God is essentially beyond any name or definition. Divine names only identify God's behaviors. God is referred to with different names depending on His actions, with the diversity of action naturally giving rise to a plurality of names. 6. We revere God's names and would not want them to be erased, defaced, or discarded. Hence the traditional hyphen in God, a sign of our care and respect.